Mr. Arnab Goswami, the Republic TV team, General Dushyant, the Director General of Clause, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. When you are introduced in this manner, you do tend to walk on cloud nine for the moment. I'm immensely flattered, but I must add here that the Operation Sindoor kind of experience are moments and times that you actually wear the uniform for, and for it to come at the time that it did, for all of us to be associated with it, for me personally to be at the helm of the Military Operations Directorate as the DGMO at that time was providential. But I do want to place on record here that the Indian Army soldier is the best soldier in the world. I have no doubt in my mind about that. The fact that we came out victors at the end of that conflict is in no small measure to the efforts of the Indian Army, to the gallant air warriors, and of course the Indian Navy, which I have repeatedly said also sailed out into the Arabian Sea. The operation itself, ladies and gentlemen, stands as a watershed moment in India's doctrinal evolution. It is an operation that transformed deterrence into compellence and restraint into assertion, and was distinct for its proactive approach and precision. It established India's capacity to apply calibrated military power across multiple domains, while still being in control of the escalation matrix. What was conceptualized as retaliation to cross-border terrorism evolved rapidly into a demonstration of strategic resolve, inter-service synergy, and indigenous technological competence, the cornerstones of India's 21st century statecraft. So what I'm going to do very quickly, we are at the end of a very long day, is speak about some strategic, operational and military lessons. Over the day today, I've seen numerous experts, various distinguished people come here and speak, give out their views. I've also been afforded this opportunity for the second time in a couple of weeks by General Dushyant to speak about this operation, and I'm very grateful for that. There are, of course, suggestions and very compelling ones that come from the experts that we've heard. So I'm going to give you some views. General Raj Shukla spoke as forcefully as he did about disruption. I will just make very brief mentions to that. We've started. Whether it turns out to be disruption in the manner that he foresaw it, time will tell. So first, about strategic lessons. Fundamentally, the operation redefined India's strategic posture. Our previous actions and responses have rested on deterrence and restraint, and everybody's spoken about this. But Sindoor brought to fore a new approach, one that merged operational precision with political clarity. By launching cross line of control and border strikes systematically and daringly, India showed up Pakistan's propensity to exploit the space between subconventional terrorism and war. Terror attacks are now being viewed through a different prism, and I'm obviously referring to the doctrinal changes that the Prime Minister has spoken about, and therefore these will now increasingly not be seen as isolated incidents. The operation challenged the assumption that Pakistan's nuclear arsenal could provide perpetual immunity against punitive Indian actions. By employing long-range precision weapons, ammunition and loitering munition, India exposed the limits of nuclear blackmail, proving that calibrated force can indeed coexist with nuclear stability. Now, I don't know how many of you've been sitting here for the better part of the day, have had occasion to listen to the Pakistan Army Chief's address earlier today I think, at the Pakistan Military Academy at Kakul. And he's yet again spoken about this. And in the tone that he normally does, and he's warned India that there is no space for war when two countries such as India and Pakistan are involved. Now, the very fact that he and the academy in Pakistan repeatedly speak about this aspect suggests to me that we've for once been able to call the bluff, and therefore there is definitely concern on the other side as far as this matter is concerned. Diplomatically, Operation Sindoor consolidated India's strategic sovereignty. India brooked no interference, setting the expectation that cross-border aggression would be met with autonomous, lawful, and proportionate responses. This framework enhanced our credibility while simultaneously forcing our adversaries to recalibrate their assumptions. Strategically, the operation underscored the necessity for theatre-level integration. The Ministry of Defence and the service headquarters functioned cohesively during the limited operation, but future multi-domain conflicts will demand unified theatre commands, and much has been said and written about it, much has been said today also, capable of sustained multi-space operations across the land, air, sea, cyber and space domains. General Manoj Pandey, I heard him speak earlier today. He was on the panel with Air Chief Marshal Rakesh Bhaduria, and they had a discussion on this. I completely echo the sentiments of General Manoj Pandey. The structures are already in place. Whether or not you want to tweak them or modify them because you learned certain lessons during Operation Sindoor, and I have my views on that, because at the end of the day it was a limited operation. That's a call that you can take. But to get into a regressive mode and say that now this process is not relevant anymore, well, I think we would do that at our own peril. And I think General Raj Shukla's views in the panel earlier today were very telling. Now, to some operational lessons, ladies and gentlemen. A defining strength of Operation Sindoor was the synchronization of the political will and military planning and execution. Objectives were realistic, unambiguous, and proportionate. And I think I can vouch for this because I was in the engine room when all the planning was taking place. And the flexibility that was afforded to the armed forces has been much spoken about. And I can vouch for that again. The aim to target and neutralize terror infrastructure, avoid escalation, and yet be prepared for third, fourth, and fifth order effects was not only planned but achieved through effective command coordination and operational discipline. The operation validated India's advances in C4 ISR integration. The precise strikes was supported by a synergized intelligence plan that included satellite images and joint targeting data shared across domains, shortening the sensor to shooter loop activity. However, again referring to the panel earlier, General Shukla spoke about the space aspect. We need much more in this regard, ladies and gentlemen. I've had occasion to attend certain meetings of our space program as part of the governing body council. I'm a member of that. We are making progress. ISRO is one of our finest agencies, and hopefully in times to come we will be nearer to the capability that we are seeking in this regard. Operational design emphasized surprise, momentum and proportionality. Ladies and gentlemen, as I got ready to come and attend the seminar today, I was doing some work at home. One of my daughters lives in Delhi. I see her occasionally. She's married. And coincidentally, on the night on which the strikes were planned, as I moved out late at night out of my house, and that was part of the whole surprise plan, she happened to be in the house that day. And when she came to learn that I was going to speak on Operation Sindoor today, she reminded me of that day. Now, surprise was such that if I was to tell you that the 2-star generals, and we have 2 of them in the Military Operations Directorate, till a couple of hours before the strikes went in, were not aware of the time on target. While they knew that the strikes were planned, they weren't exactly aware as to when these strikes would go in. So therefore, that's the kind of surprise that we were looking to achieve. Coordinations and rehearsals that we carried out with other government agencies, such as air drills, blackouts, I think we just had to sound the Home Ministry, the Home Secretary, everybody was on board, and I think that whole environment managed to create that momentum that we were looking for. And I think that's one of the key areas because of which we were able to achieve surprise. The employment of precision weapons and munitions and indigenous vectors allowed deep and accurate penetration against terror hubs while alleviating the problem of collateral damage. I think some of those pictures and videos that you've seen where the munition has gone right through the roof will tell you what I'm speaking about. Escalation was managed through a controlled release of information and maintenance of a communication channel with the Pakistan Army. And when I say this, I'm obviously referring to the DGMO's hotline, which at that time and which at most times is the only channel of communication that exists between the two countries. Operation Sindoor marked the first operational deployment of loiter munitions, which revealed both the potential and some drawbacks of these vectors. Future conflicts will demand robust counter-drone measures and swarm coordination systems. Tactical drones with frontline units and integrated anti-UAS grids have thus become doctrinal imperatives, an area that is now being addressed through structural changes in our fighting arms. Earlier this year you would have heard the Chief of Army Staff speak from Dras, from the Kargil War Memorial, on the Kargil Vijay Divas. That was at the end of July. And he announced that day about the structural changes that we were going ahead and carrying out. I must tell you here today that many of those now are on the verge of completion. I will not label those as disruptions because right now the scale that we are doing that cannot be categorized as that. However, I think you'll bear with me and with us when I say that these have to be validated. We have to test these. But tomorrow, if we were to have another edition of Operation Sindoor, and the Chief of Army Staff has also spoken about that, you could well have these newer structures swing into action for the roles that they have been designed for. We've got one of our co-commanders sitting here from the Western Front, and maybe over a cup of tea you could ask him. And I think these are fast getting ready. Our procedures are such that equipment does take a while to come in, but there are many measures that we are taking at our formation levels to ensure that these newer units and structures are actually empowered to carry out the role that they're designed for. The enemy's use of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation highlighted the emergence of information and perception warfare as a decisive front. While we successfully countered false narratives through unified communications across the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Defence, and media outlets, but the episode reinforced that perception management must be pre-planned and that there is a certain investment that you need to make in this regard. And there is yet some thought and work that is required in this area. Over lunch, I was speaking with Arnab about this, and therefore, this is an area that we could spend more time and effort on. Military lessons. While the Army, Navy and Air Force achieved unprecedented coordination during Operation Sindoor, the operation did highlight the strategic necessity of theatre commands. Future conflicts will, in all probability, not afford the flexibility of siloed methods. Silos were earlier spoken about in a different manner though. that may have been employed on occasion during Operation Sindoor, especially if the threat emerges simultaneously on either one of our contested borders. Indigenous technology, missiles, EW suits, drones, communication networks, these were core success enablers. Homegrown C4 ISR I've spoken about ensured data integrity, strategic autonomy, and rapid responsiveness. The operation thus validated the fact that technological sovereignty, and Ajay Chandpuria spoke about this earlier, I heard his address, is now synonymous with strategic security. The Indian military demonstrated that compellence can be exercised within calibrated thresholds. This new escalation ladder allows management of intensity levels that are commensurate to objectives. And I think that probably will answer, a lot of maybe naysayers, possibly not correct to call them that, who often come and ask me or many others as to, did we stop at the right time? An essential shift from deterrence to active coercion while retaining moral and legal legitimacy. As India faces blended threats, terrorism, cyber attacks, misinformation, and conventional war, the Operation Sindoor model does offer an adaptable framework. General Manoj Pandey said earlier, I think he was sounding a little or putting up a little red flag that conflicts such as these, we should not be hasty in drawing our lessons. And therefore, one such, that theaterization is now no more required. It would be hasty to say that. And the Chief of Army Staff earlier spoke about the currency of land warfare, the occupation of territory. So wars will still continue to be defined by capture of territory, and especially so with the two peculiar adversaries that we have. So hence the primacy of land operations has not only been underscored yet again, but will remain relevant for all times to come. Another important lesson has been that of control of airspace or the air littoral. I think Air Marshal Diptendu and my friend General Sumer Dikuna will be speaking about this, so I will not dwell on this. But it did emerge in the few days, especially after hostilities had been ceased and when the Pak Army violated and launched a large number of drones across the borders in LC, that the control and ability to detect and destroy these must rest with the commander of this battle space on ground, which is the Corps Commander. In this regard, we may need to review existing command and control arrangements and formulate newer methods and procedures, as also amend and change the distances that define this airspace to enable a swift and cogent response and action to any attempted violations. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, Operation Sindoor will be remembered not only for its tactical brilliance, but for redesigning India's strategic orientation. It affirmed that national resolve backed by institutional integration and indigenous innovation can ensure success in very complex and vexing operational situations. The greatest legacy of this operation lies in its clarity, the affirmation that India will act with precision, purpose, and proportionality. The next step lies in translating these lessons into enduring structures, formal doctrines, functional theatre commands, and permanent multi-domain readiness. Operation Sindoor is also symbolic on multiple levels. It represents confidence in controlled escalation, deterring through demonstrated capacity to act without fear of consequence. It signals India's will to define, not adhere to externally imposed or perceivable thresholds. It also sets a benchmark for how DIME instruments converge to achieve strategic aims in contested environments. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.